Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the story of thousands of men in Britain who, in the middle of the patriotic fever of World War I, made a choice that got them branded as cowards, even traitors. They refused to fight.
So, to really get a handle on what was at stake here, we're not going to start with a big battle or some dry piece of legislation. Nope, we're starting with one man, on the front line, facing the ultimate punishment for his beliefs. I want you to really picture this. It's June 1916. An officer is barking a direct order at Jack Foister. Right turn, quick march. And Jack doesn't move. Now Jack knows. He knows that in a war zone, doing what he's doing, that could get him shot by a firing squad. And still, he didn't move.
Now, Jack Foister's stand, it seems almost unthinkable, right? Especially when you think about how Britain first reacted to the war. So how did we get here? How did a nation of eager volunteers end up forcing men like Jack to make this kind of terrifying choice?
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. It's 1914. War breaks out, and Britain is just swept up in this massive wave of patriotism. You've seen the posters, right? Your king and country need you. And man, it worked. By the end of that first year, over 1 million guys had signed up. Eventually, that number swelled to 2.5 million, all volunteers.
But here's the thing. The sheer horror of the Western Front, the number of casualties, it was just unsustainable. By 1916, it was clear. Volunteers weren't going to be enough to fill the gaps. So the government did something pretty radical for Britain at the time. They passed the Military Service Act. For the first time ever, military service wasn't a choice anymore. It was compulsory. I mean, this was a massive, massive shift for the entire country.
And this new law, the one that basically said, you're a soldier now, whether you like it or not, well, it created this huge crisis of conscience for thousands of men who believed the war itself was just wrong.
And these were the men who became known as Conscientious Objectors, or COs for short. But in public, they were often called conchies. And trust me, that was not a compliment. It was a word dripping with contempt.
So why did they object? Well, it wasn't just one single reason. You had men who were deeply religious, like the Quakers, who were pacifists through and through. Then you had the political objectors. They saw this as a rich man's war, an imperialist squabble where the working class was being sent to die for the profits of the ruling class. And for others, it was simpler than that, but maybe even more profound. It was just a fundamental, gut-level belief that killing another human being is wrong, period.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. Even among the objectors, there wasn't total agreement. You had a group called the alternativists. They were like, okay, I won't kill, but I'll still do my part. So they'd become stretcher bearers or ambulance drivers, incredibly dangerous jobs, by the way. But then you had the absolutists. And for them, any involvement at all, even helping indirectly, was a moral compromise they just weren't willing to make.
So what happens when you tell the army you're not going to fight? How did the system actually handle these guys? Well, to get an exemption, you had to go in front of a military tribunal and prove that your objection was genuine.
Now, the law itself did have something called a conscience clause, and on paper, that was a huge victory for activists. In theory, it was supposed to protect these men. But in practice, the whole system was pretty much designed to make them fail. See, these tribunals, they were local panels, and they were usually made up of older guys. Men who were too old to fight themselves, but who were fiercely patriotic and had some very strong ideas about duty. They weren't really interested in a deep philosophical discussion about the morality of war.
So instead of a fair hearing, what these objectors often walked into was just open hostility. They were mocked, they were insulted, they were basically accused of being cowards, just trying to get out of doing their duty. Everything they believed in was just dismissed.
And for the thousands of men whose claims were rejected, well, the price they paid for sticking to their guns was unbelievably high.
All in all, we're talking about around 16,000 men who officially registered as COs. Now, compared to the millions who served, that's a tiny number. But as a group of people standing up against the entire system, that's pretty significant.
And if that group, more than 6,000, ended up getting arrested for refusing to follow military orders, they'd be court-martialed and thrown into prison, where the whole point really was just to break them.
And the way they were treated, it was just brutal. Out in public, women would come up and hand them white feathers, the ultimate symbol of cowardice. And inside military prisons, they faced what you could only call organized torture. There was this thing called field punishment number 1. The soldiers nicknamed it crucifixion.
They'd literally tie a man to a fence or a gunwheel for hours on end, exposed to the elements. Some guys were repeatedly dunked into pits filled with freezing cold water.
You'd think after the war ended, that would be it, right? Nope. As a final kick in the teeth, these men had the right to vote taken away for 5 whole years. It was a clear signal from the government. We're punishing you not just for what you did, but for what you believe.
But here's the twist in the story. While the government, the press, and a lot of the public were calling these men cowards and traitors, they actually found respect from a very, very surprising group of people.
This is where you see this incredible paradox. This quote comes from a Quaker CO. He's in a guard room, under arrest, with 5 other soldiers who are also in trouble for something. And after he explains why he's there, why he refuses to fight, you know what they do? They don't mock him. They don't call him a coward. They each shake his hand and tell him, "Stick to it, matey."
And this wasn't a one-off thing. It seems that the actual soldiers on the front lines, the guys who had seen the industrialized slaughter of the trenches up close, the ones who knew, as one of them put it, that war was just bloody murder, they often had way more respect for a man who refused to kill than the civilians who were safe back home.
And all of this, it leaves us with a really tough question, one that's just as relevant today as it was 100 years ago. When your country goes to war, where do you draw the line? Where does your duty to the nation stop and your duty to your own conscience begin?